88. Joe Nolan, how's it going?
Brian, time does not repeat.
Well, let's get into it, man. Let's see what we look like here. Look at this. Wow. Hey, man. All right. Look at this.
Time echoes, Brian. Time does not repeat; it echoes.
Well, I don't think any of us really understand what time is anymore.
I'm too busy. I'm excited about streaming on Twitter, Brian, and I got caught up in Twitter as I tend to.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why we came up with all these distractions. It's just in time for the pandemic, so we're set. But yeah, so
I'm so busy following the podcast. I forgot that I'm on the podcast. Brian.
Right. Well, hey, man. I'm glad that you're here. Welcome, everybody. Sorry that my camera's over here and then Joe's over here, and there's a lot of things going on. But I'm just glad that everybody's doing all right and hanging in, and hope you're being safe. And we're just glad to be here. And we've been pretty excited about getting our live setup together. And so here we are. We got it. And I think this is, an exponential leap. It's been a really cool thing to go from sort of, like you said, sort of canned recordings, right, to now it's in the moment, it's real, it's happening, and God forbid anything awful and viral happen that gets captured. But I don't have any pets to do anything weird, so I think we're good in that way. Well, that's not true. We have a pet snake, but I think that he's secure. So. But anyway, so yeah, welcome everybody. And we have now the ability, if you haven't seen, if you're listening on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook or wherever all you're seeing this, you can actually now just leave us chat questions and we'll try to get to them during the show. So that's kind of a new fun wrinkle as well. It's another thing I have to look at, but that's okay. All right. So that's a neat thing too. So I'm just happy to be here. So anyway, what have you been doing, man? What are we talking about today? Well, I can tell you, for me, by the way, I got to hang out. He didn't know we were hanging out, but I got to hang out with John Anik today, and that was good. As part of Professor Nancy Kidder's writing and fighting class. So that was neat to be able to see John's perspectives on the UFC and them going forward. And then otherwise, some of the creative challenges that lie therein. Got some neat little insights to what he does. But yeah. So what about you, my man?
I missed out on watching that today. It's been nice. Thank you. Shout out to Nancy if she's watching this or if she's going to see it later, because she's really been knocking it out of the park recently with her class. For people who don't remember, Nancy used to be a guest, or once was a guest, will be a guest again on the podcast before, and she has a class at American University called Writing and Fighting, and you can follow her on Twitter as well and on Instagram. And the Writing and Fighting class is basically an English class that uses combat sports and the culture around it as like a jumping off point to explore writing. And she was kind enough to have us on the show earlier this week. And yesterday had a whole panel of women who are in MMA journalism and former fighters. And then, like you said, today she had John Anik on, and we were obviously on the show on Tuesday, and then the last couple of days she's just included us like we're getting to what's the word for that? You get to just like go
audit.
to class, but you don't get a grade. Yeah, she's basically made it easy for us to audit the class, and if you friend her up on Twitter and you show an interest in that class, she'll probably let you do the same, because she's really generous about what she's doing with that class, and it's been really fun to sort of engage with her and engage with their students and sort of it's weird when people ask you to be in a position of teaching in any way, really. Not that we were teaching the class, for instance, but we were clearly there to try to impart some kind of perspective to these students. So there you go. There's a whole pedagogical setup happening this week, Brian. And I think when you find yourself in that situation, it always gives you a different perspective on what you're doing, because you've got to explain yourself to somebody who may have no context. So it's a fun opportunity when you get a chance to do that, especially when you get to be, working with cool people like Nancy. So shout out to Nancy.
And I've had any situation where I have to sort of clarify anything about me and what I do and what my areas of focus are or whatever. It's nearly impossible for me to do that with any grace, because like you, it's like there's about 10 channels running of things at all times that really embody different mindsets and different traits and personalities, requirements. And I mean, I'm doing a lot of different things. And so it's weird when I get into a setting like that, I try to explain myself, from at least the point of orientation of how they might see me or something. But it's sort of like always a reminder, I suppose, whenever anybody tries to introduce me, it seems like people always end up being like, I mean, why don't you tell them, Brian? It's like, and so anyway, and that feels even more pronounced when you're not doing things in person. But yeah, so it's pretty cool. I mean, honestly, like the fact that she's been able to have so many panel discussions and so many things go on that obviously we wouldn't be privy to, I don't think, as much under normal circumstances. So it's a half full kind of a thing, I suppose, overall. But yeah, but for me, I'm just like, we were kind of talking about this yesterday, not on the show, but just how ready I am to get past the how are you dealing with the pandemic, how are you modulating what you're doing to adjust for the pandemic, as much as that's a
Mhm.
real thing. I feel like it really struck me when you were talking about that, because it's like, uh, well, it's almost like a sort of a slap on the head in a way. It's like, be where you are, and what's the future? Don't think so much about the now as being the now. We don't even know what that is. So
Right.
why try to like pave any path right now, that's that uh, concerted? You can still do very pointed and directed things in your creative work or whatever, any kind of work, uh, and still embrace a certain level of uncertainty. If anything, it's just another variable in it,
Right.
but it doesn't mean that it should amount to paralysis. At the same time, it is important for people to realize that it's fine to just be wholly and completely a couch potato or whatever it is that you need to do. So it's not all going to
Yeah.
like come to you. But for me, like, it's been about not necessarily emotive type of creative things, but more about uh, strategy or goals or
Mhm.
upgrading or working out a problem that I haven't been able to technically figure out, or whatever.
Well, you've put in, I mean, you've been super productive with this podcast. So, I mean, in terms of like this transformation is really all due to Brian. Brian's like, let's not do the podcast now. It's two things too crazy. And I'm like, okay. And then like 3 weeks later, he's like, let's do it live with video. I think it's ready. So it was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. Like, right when all this really hit, it was, we're all sort of scrambling, trying to figure out how we can make sure that we can live, and that's going to be an ongoing thing. But at that point, it was just whatever fat you can trim off your schedule is probably a good thing to do right now, and then slowly
Yeah.
and deliberately re-add those pieces. Because, for me, I honestly just, we kind of talked about this last time a little bit, but I just didn't feel like I had anything to say. Like, who cares what
Right.
I have to say? And that's still should always be the case. But
But it's a strong reminder.
yeah, but I've been really in a point of admiration for those that really just pressed on. Like, I'm a big listener and fan of the Men in the Myth podcast with Sean El Shadi and Chuck Mindenhall and their producer Chris. And I think that they just do such an amazing job. And with all of the craziness going on, with MMA media, they were able to press through, keep a schedule, willfully and openly acknowledge how crazy this all is and how it will probably all be useless within 2 days, or a totally different thing in 2 days, 3 days from the previous episode. It was just a lot of those kind of things. I just felt like anything tonally would just feel just not important. So I
Mhm.
feel like people are starting to get a little bit of sea legs in this transitional period, or whatever you want to call it. So now what I'm interested in, what I'm talking about, is like, yeah, like what is next? And so, I know that both you and I have been on either side of like artistic sort of grants and projects and things like that. And I think that for a lot of artists right now, like the weakest link, I think, for a lot of people, including myself, is like grant writing and being aware of where opportunities are, uh,
Mhm.
and how to make the most of them if you get them. I mean, that's a whole art form unto itself that I know you've been steeped in for a long time, and that's a hugely valuable skill set. And so now, when sort of the pressure's on to be up on a list because resources are running out or whatever. Like anybody that's got an upper hand in terms of fundraising or grant writing or knowing where those channels are is, I think, at a huge point of
Right.
advantage. Have you been able to like, do you feel like that enough, like artists that you talk to and creatives of all types, do you feel like that people are um, making the most of that or struggling with that or both, or what do you, or are there's just really not a lot of available things? I mean, real quick, I mean, I've been working for an arts organization as a creative consultant, helping artists get their projects together quickly in short order to get this grant money. And so I'm helping them sort of right size the scope and the maybe sometimes the intensity of what they really in their biggest dream wanted to do, and like let's right size it for what's now, and at the same time allow yourself to build something towards the future. I've been talking to a lot of artists all over the world, and you know, the story is kind of the same, at least as I'm seeing it. But these are people that are dialed into at least getting grants from some organization. So I'm just curious what your perspective is on that.
I mean, I think it's probably like it always is, you know, which is that some artists are, you know, that's just a part of their toolbox and it's a strong part of their toolbox. And for other artists, I think the the they may or may not have that going on because, well, for some artists, like it just depends on how we're looking at this, because lots of grants and things, especially grants, there's a difference between grants and awards. There's all this language around all this stuff. So like when we're talking about grants, almost always there is, you know, there's like parameters that your project has to fit in, you know what I mean? And so like for me, I've had luck with a lot of public money, right, from the state or from the city. But the big reason for that has been the fact that so much of my projects that I've done with funding of that kind have had to do with street photography, right? So like
Mm.
literally like the infrastructure and the commercial landscape, you know, that's like my subject, you know. So it's really easy to translate that type of discipline into public projects, you know. It's, I mean, it's easier than it is to do with other things. I know lots of artists who would love to have more access to public money, but they don't have practices that necessarily, you know, translate subject
Hmm.
wise into it the way mine does, and or they don't have projects that translate into things like community projects and creative placemaking and social practice art and all that stuff right now, especially in Nashville. All that stuff is really where most of that funding is pointed. There's some funding like at the state level, there's a fellowship that Tennessee Arts Commission does, that's strictly based on your portfolio. That's all they're considering, pretty much. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? I wouldn't say strictly, but it's generally that's what it is. But that tends to be more. That's more of that's like a fellowship. It sort of behaves more like a prize in that way, and it's also something that tends to go to more established artists who have a body of work that can sort of represent them as somebody who deserves a fellowship from the state. You know what I mean? Then not a lot of emerging artists are getting that necessarily. But with all that in mind, one of the things that's weird right now is that suddenly I think there is more money that's available to people just in terms of you know, you're an artist and you have a financial need. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And I think that artists who are more familiar with and confident about the process of writing grants and getting awards and things like that, I think they have a leg up, obviously, because they understand how to swim through that kind of bureaucracy. But I also think it may be a frustrating time and it may be a bit of a desperate time for artists who have had an eye on that and haven't gone after that yet. But I would say now's the time to go after it. Go after it as much as you can now. If you feel like, you know, that could be a part of your toolkit again, you know, in a time when things are more normal, well then maybe just go ahead and try to make it part of your toolkit now, because honestly, there's lots of spots, you know, where you might be able to find funding in one way or another. I would encourage people to follow me at Mighty Joe Nolan on Twitter, and my pinned tweet at the very top of my feed is at least one place you can go that's got a whole bunch of links from Fractured Atlas. So Fractured Atlas is an artist's resource platform, and they have a whole like updated list of resources for artists since the quarantine stuff's
Yeah,
happened. So you could start there.
absolutely. It's weird though because it's just there's just so much more out there than I think a lot of people think. So yeah, I definitely encourage people to go to Joe's Twitter page and get kicking around. And I think that also in the same spirit as a lot of things going on right now, the typical sort of front end requirements that are sort of um, designed almost to keep people away from things. I think a lot of barriers to and
Uh-huh.
friction for people has been removed for a lot of things. So I'm sure it's not empirical and across the board for everything, but I think that in general, there's just more of a runway built because people know that it's time to access resources however you can. So pretty awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's another space where again, with all due respect to people who for whom this whole situation has been difficult, desperate, chaotic. If you've been sick or whatever, I mean that's a whole other world of
Yes.
of pain and anguish and anxiety that luckily I have been spared, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, thanks for
but
the reminder because
but
it is sort of it's so easy to it really is. It's so easy to just
yeah,
it's actually
yeah.
part of the what makes the parallel living of all this so bizarre. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But there is a thing of like, out of sight, out of mind. And I think it's important for me to remember that it's like, okay, this is what's going on. But I do think that there's also the fact that no matter who you are, no matter what you're doing, when things get chaotic like this, there's there's opportunity for you to find resources that you might not have found
Mhm.
before. It may seem counterintuitive, but that's actually real. You know what I mean? And I, like you said too, I do think that the normal sort of barriers to entry and the gatekeepers and things, which maybe there's less of that nowadays. Anyway, I would like to think, at least in terms of people thinking about like greater inclusiveness, not only of different types of people, but also in terms of like your paycheck shouldn't be something that keeps you out of going to galleries, things like that. So I feel like like class barriers and all that stuff, I'd like to think some of that stuff's coming down anyway, but at a time like this I think it's even more so that way.
Mhm.
So I think if you're somebody who feels like you've had trouble making progress, getting your art practice like to have traction in your local scene or in your state thing or whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish. I mean, I think if you're healthy and if you can manage to have some resources so that you can keep having some kind of practice, I don't think it's time to hunker down with your art practice. I think it's time to be ambitious and be bold with it. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? As much as you can.
No.
I think there's a real challenge out there because visual art specifically is not translating very well to virtual platforms. If you ask me, pretty much that's the true story across the board, as far as I can tell. And I think there's a real opportunity out there for people to think of ways to get their art in front of people, in with better ideas than digital images streaming or
Yeah.
exhibited. And the people who are doing that, by the way, keep doing it. Keep sending me your links. I want to see
Yeah.
all of it, but I also want to see. The limitations are clear. We've established that.
Yeah.
So who's going to be the first person to start getting past that and get into a new
Mhm.
space that makes art somehow present again?
Yeah,
Anyway,
no,
I
but
don't
it
know.
really is. It's interesting because I think that
I'm going to put some art up on my Instagram tomorrow,
right.
Brian.
Back off your indictment of the visual. No. But no, but it's
Well, I'm not. I still would indict it, but I would also say I don't have the
yeah.
answer. I'm just gonna put it on everybody else to say we need answers.
No, you're 100% right. I mean, I think that in my experience, having worked a lot with tech companies over the years, from a marketing perspective, for the longest time, it's been all about in that business, sort of creating. How do you create and manage the experience of the customer or the customer experience? And I think that some of that um, is kind of good stuff, actually. I think for a lot of artists to consider with respect to how they need to modify or modulate maybe what you're doing. You know, I think what I've been sort of in my conversations that I've had with a lot of artists this past week, like I said, gosh, everywhere too, all over the world, places I'm not even sure I remember what they're called, but it's this, the immediate idea is how do I take this thing and then put it online, right? And it's like, well, all right. I mean, yes, you can do that. Okay, but uh, how are you giving someone some sort of an experience through that in terms of the way that they come across it, the way they discover it, the way that they interact with it or not, or consume it or whatever it is. There's so many points along the path of the viewer. The viewer is not anymore just, I don't think the viewer anymore is somebody that's just a native member of an organization or a person on a website or whatever. You have to think about it as an interrelational thing. It's like there's in the same way that like marketing works, right? Like you've got a funnel that you're building and then you want to draw people in and then guide them towards a particular desired outcome or conclusion or experience or whatever it is. And I think that there's probably some basic marketing stuff too that would really just go a long way if you're able to sort of extrapolate the concepts without getting mired in like the businessiness of it, right? It's not about the bottom line type of mentality as much as it is
Right.
about process. And I think that for a lot of people, there's, like I said, this kind of beginning notion of how do I just translate one thing to be the other, and it requires a deeper and more meaningful transformation generally than that. And I think that those things can be done actually pretty reasonably. Sometimes the ideas are actually more simple than trying to go through all the work to replicate something in a digital world. Sometimes you can
Mm-hmm.
come off of it entirely and
Right.
give it up as to be something that someone else is going to give to you, or that you're sort of curating and you're turning the dynamic around, or it's something participatory where input comes in and then something comes back out, or there's different
Right.
ways of relating to a lot of these different projects. But I can understand, at least from the flat standpoint of two-dimensional painting and photography and things like that, like really up against it. But I really do think that
I think it's good that you think of photography as two dimensional.
yeah, yeah, right. It's a piece of paper on but hey man, I just work here. But you get the idea. So I just think that people can think about that, I think, a little bit more deeply. And it's in if you don't really know what to be doing, I think that generally it's like, well, then don't. I know you want to be doing stuff, but you don't have to do anything. Like, let the ideas simmer, but just know that that's towards a future outcome that you want to have. Uh, have a North Star. Like, try to be thinking about that. Um, now these like a lot of the MMA media that we speak with and all that. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be on deadlines without your source material. And I can't. I really look forward to bringing back through a lot of the people that we've already talked to sort of see like, where are you now? Um, Chuck Mendenhall, where's the book? Where's our book? We're ready for our book now.
Right. Yeah.
So no, but anyway, so I feel like that there is a translation of medium and work and intent that has not been sorted out yet. But I think that people should open themselves up more to what that can be, and it might look really different than what you thought.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I also do. I just have a feeling of like, if you don't, I mean, you can get really woo woo about it, but you don't necessarily have to. You just have to sort of believe that, the actions, that your willpower and your actions in some way affect the world. I mean, if I think most of us think that if you're
Vibrations, man.
listening to this podcast, or maybe not, but I think you can choose to believe that it does. But I think that, I feel like I'm constantly like trying to be measured about my resources and my time and my energy, and be thinking about the fact that, okay, these are my current circumstances, and there's things I want to be paying attention to because I want to make sure that I'm managing this situation well and safely. And at the same time, I also find myself every day figuring out, but I can take this little bit over here, this little bit of energy or this little bit of resources or this little bit of ingenuity or whatever, and I can push that towards something that I'm planning on the some project that I'm trying to push forward that I won't be up that even if things were good, it would take me months to get this album done. You know what I mean? But it's like I'm going to go ahead and keep on working on making another album. You know what I mean? I'm not going to get lost in some hopeless void where there's no tomorrow where I have another album done. It's like, oh, there's going to be a tomorrow and there'll be another album
Yeah,
done.
well,
You know
the,
what I
the thing
mean?
about that too is that music is specifically the roads have been built a lot for that already. I mean, granted,
That's true too.
there's deeper considerations, in terms of
Mm.
again, with like along the lines of sort of creating an experience. I mean, I've been working with sort of sound artists that are developing sort of new technological ways for working with web developers to really get into how do I create something that is more immersive or interactive, and it's really a, a bigger consideration than just like putting out some songs like you or I do in terms of music that we make, but the that's almost like more cultural, like just kind of therapeutic. It's like rock and roll, or whatever. It's like this is gonna just
Mhm.
happen. I don't give a shit. Like what,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, true. It doesn't have to be music. It could be
Yeah,
anything. But what I'm getting at is just, that I don't I'm trying to make sure that I don't let myself just live in this bubble. You know what I mean? It's like, no, I'm living beyond this bubble too. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? That's what I'm getting at is like having a perspective and having a trajectory that respects and understands like the situation that we're all in, but is also planning to be in third gear by the time the gates open up again. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, that's different. Different people have different ways of looking at things, but it's better for some people to operate that way, and for some people, it's actually just maybe not. But yeah,
Right.
but
Yeah,
I
for
do think
sure.
the people that are up for it, and I think most people are. It is just about like, man, okay, this is a very unique time. It's time to make some big jumps, and I'm just concerned with the future. These sort of solemn stories of adaptation in the midst of all this are yeah, like a little bit uh, sort of worn at this point. Especially like I feel a particular charge by the fact that this is so horrible, right? Like that this if I'm here and I'm okay, then I need to make the most of it in whatever way that I can, or try to do something that's helpful for people, or that gives somebody an experience, or whatever it is, just whatever I can contribute. That's just kind of what. And then also just the idea of like, increasingly, and maybe this is something that just happens as you get older too, but it's just about honoring other people, and making it about others, as much as possible. But what else
Mhm.
would you like to know about me?
Are we having any chat or anything like that happening on the
No,
accounts?
no, this is
Yeah, we're live. If you guys are watching this live right now, I hope somebody may
yeah.
be.
If
If you
it's even
are,
working.
feel free to jump in and ask a question or make a comment, and we'll be sure to include it in the show here.
Uh, yeah, I mean, we're on an uphill journey here, because we've been doing this podcast for more than 2 years now, but always in an audio format and only via sort of subscribers that exist in the realm of all the podcast platforms. And so
Right.
you can't reach out to that group of those people and say, "Hey, email list of all of our subscribers." Like we're actually totally changing gears now, and we're going to be doing this video thing in completely different places than where you're consuming our podcast.
Right.
And then also people's attenuation to that kind of thing right now, understandably being inundated with all this content.
Yeah.
It's like it's going to take a while. So
Wherever you may be experiencing this, even if you're just listening to the podcast after the fact, Brian has now created. We already had the Art Fight podcast account at Twitter, but now there's an Art Fight podcast account at Instagram. It's not just a hashtag anymore. Now it's like it's a little guy punching away. Art Fight podcast on Instagram, and then there's also an Art Fight podcast channel on
yeah.
YouTube. So follow all those if you would. We would appreciate it. And Twitter and YouTube are the spaces where we'll be doing this live every Thursday at 5 p.m. Should we talk about another thing we're considering, or should we wait and talk about that
What
later?
is the other thing we're considering?
Should I just say it? If you can't remember it, how important could it possibly be?
I hope it's
Well, we're
good.
considering doing another
Oh,
weekly show that will be a little bit shorter, and it'll be a little bit more focused than just this sort of rambling talk that we do every week. I think we're on to an idea that could be a lot of fun. We may do it next Tuesday, but we may keep planning because we planned a little bit the other night, just spontaneously, and came up with some pretty good ideas, I think. So we may decide to keep
yeah.
planning a little
Now,
bit
now
longer,
that we're
but
sober, we're gonna evaluate the ideas and then determine their actual viability or interest
yeah,
beyond just
I
you and
think
I.
I was totally. I had just finished dinner. I was completely sober.
Well, I think I just
I was maybe a little drunk on pasta. A little sugar drunk on
yeah, I think I just
pasta.
outed myself in terms of our idea session. But yeah, so no, but the idea now is that we're going to be live on Tuesdays at 3 p.m. and Thursdays at 5 p.m. And I don't expect anybody to remember that, but that's okay.
Central
All you got to do
Time,
is go to the YouTube channel and hit subscribe, and then there's like a notification thing, and you can just do those things.
Nashville time.
But yeah, we're going to have something a little bit more specific and kind of segment focused and more fight focused for the Tuesday piece and martial arts focused. But well, it's kind of 50-50 art fight, but I think
Yeah, but it'll
combat
be
could be the central theme, and we'll just leave it at
right.
that. And
Yeah, and we were lucky enough this week, like we talked about earlier. We were lucky to be on Nancy Kidder's the Zoom classroom that she's currently doing with her American University class, writing and fighting. And should we talk something about? Should we talk about fighting a little bit right now? We talked about 249 on that show. People can find that on YouTube, by the
yeah,
way. Like the archive of that on Nancy's YouTube writing and fighting. Is it the writing and fighting page
yeah,
on
yeah,
YouTube?
yeah. Oh, and by the way, let me just finish up one thing real quick, which is just to say that on the Thursdays that we normally, this is the time we've always been taping the podcast anyway. So for you and I, it's like
Right.
normal, but for an audience to tune in live. Now it's Thursday at 5. It'll still go out to the normal podcast audio channels after, so it's not like this is all that it is now. And then
Right.
also, typically our show is very guest focused. We've just been sort of slow ramping up to that as we kind of dial in all of this stuff, and so we'll see how well
I think we're talking, and I think it seems likely
next
at this
week.
point that we will have a guest
Yeah.
next week, but we won't tell anybody. You'll find out about it next week if you guys follow us at Art Fight Podcast on Twitter or on
See,
Instagram. We'll be letting you guys know ahead of time who's going to be our guest. It's a longtime friend of mine here in Nashville, very creative dude. He's got a brand new project happening, and he can talk a lot about sort of the chaos that he's gone through and the solutions he's found during this whole quarantine period. So it'll be a real classic art fight episode next week. I
yeah,
think.
and then like I said, I really want to get a lot of people that are sort of friends of the show back through because it just feels like a good time to connect with people. So we'll be doing that over the next few weeks too. And who knows, maybe we'll even pick up some other less formal paths, right? But I think we're just going to be doing a lot more, which is great. And in terms of, yeah, Nancy Kidder and the class, we were there with Josh Gross, who's a senior writer at The Athletic.
Right. Yeah.
And that was just really cool to hear from him and his perspective. His story is just wild. But it was just,
Yeah.
it's cool to talk to students or at least be a part of those conversations to talk with students because it really is. The stories are the same. Like I watched also Esther Lynn's appearance in Nancy's class. She's getting all the best guests, right? She's starting to put us out of business, no, but she's a friend of the show, so it's great. But I guess what I'm saying is that all these people that have come on there, it's the same story over and over again. At its essence, it's basically you don't have a lot. You got to figure it out. You got to go physically if you can, or not be afraid to hit up the people that are doing what it is that you want to do or that are going to allow you to do what you want to do. And you just have to get after them and go to the source. Don't wait for people to sort of, you don't try to get exposure in this weird disconnected way. Like, screw that, man. Just go right to the source and just be like, I'll do whatever. This is where I want to be. And then you just kind of earn and revise and live through it and figure it out and grow and prosper or whatever. But the story was just really interesting. That it's all the same. People just decide eventually that, and it's not like they have this clear idea of like, I want to go do that. Esther Lynn was saying, she's, by the way, those who don't know, she's a very amazing photographer that focuses primarily on combat sports, but she's got a lot of other skills and a lot of other interests and a lot of other things. But she comes from
Hmm.
a film background, and she went to NYU and was trying to figure out that whole thing, and you could just tell that something got rerouted, a natural interest in combat sports developed, and then there was just this proximity and things happen, and that's become a lot of what her existence and what she's known for now, and was not anything what she started out doing necessarily, because she was really into to film and cinematography and those pieces. So while related, it's like, I don't know, people need to open, I think, shuffle the deck of your sense of possibilities and say yes to things and see where you end up. I think is uh, where we kind of ended up in that conversation with the class was sort of just like make a note of the fact that everything right now is an experiment, and do what you can to play around with your circumstances and your focus, because it's kind of like, I don't know, it's just a good time to reset and try different shit or do nothing. I mean, I've had some very
Hmm.
productive times in my life where I actually wasn't very productive, but I look back on it and I realized that was absolutely the best thing to do, was to not try to make another record or not work on this project,
Yeah.
because people derive their sense of sort of validity of self, especially in these times where it's like, if you're not on the internet doing something, you don't exist or something. Uh, and so,
Yeah, you gotta. I think you gotta keep track of, like, if you're, like, again, like, you have a sense of your resources, or like how much fuel you have in the tank. This is important for fighters too. We know this. We see so many guys just stomp on the gas for a round, and then all of a sudden they're exhausted and they've got 3 more rounds to fight or 4 more rounds to fight. And I think the same thing happens with art. There's a great book called The Adding Machine by William Burroughs, and it was written during a time when he had moved from London back to New York, because Ginsberg got him a job teaching at Brooklyn College, I believe. And while he was there teaching, he didn't know how to teach. He had never taught before, and he's fucking William Burroughs, right? So what the fuck? I mean, this guy's like, how do I translate this shit to these people?
I knew you would
So
have a good
so
William
he
Burroughs
he
impression.
he so he basically writes The Adding Machine during that time, and you can see that he's just sort of working through what is good writing, and how do you, how do you quantify it, and then how do you impart the skills to create it, you know what I mean? So a lot of it is taking apart writing in this way. And but he talks about the fact that writer's block, okay, is really should be called overwrite. He's like, if you write too much, then you'll find that you develop writer's block. He's like, the key is, here's what he said. This is, I never forgot this line, but you have to leave some momentum on the page. And then when you come back and you reread what you wrote yesterday or the day before, or whatever, you reread it, and then you get to the end and there's momentum on the page. And all of a sudden you pick up the idea that you were like in the middle of, and you got somewhere to go now. But if you just write and write and write until you just got nothing left, then when you come back, there's no momentum on the
Do you
page.
think he was
So,
also?
The Adding Machine by
Yeah,
William Burroughs, and he would say, in this time, if you had if you had the fuel to just do so, keep going, then keep going. But you want to leave some momentum on the page, or some momentum at the end of your day, or the end of your week, or the end of your month,
yeah.
whatever it is. You know, gauge it properly, but don't be afraid to burn it up if you
So very
got
different than the very different than this whole fighter thing, right? Leave it all in the cage. Um,
Well, at the end, you want to leave it
yeah,
all in
at the
there.
end, yeah. when
You want that last line of The Great Gatsby. You know what I
yeah,
mean? You got to leave.
I wonder if he was
Yeah.
also sort of alluding to just the idea that almost like almost like a melody, like the only way to get a song out of your head, a friend of mine taught me once, was to resolve the melody in your mind.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Jeff
Interesting.
Kaufman told me this many many years ago.
Huh?
He said, just and for I don't know, a melodic resolve, you know what it is if you hear it, but essentially it's just wrapping up the melody of the
Yeah.
song in some way that has a connotation of finality, um,
Right.
and feels like the final chapter of the
Come
song.
come back to the one.
Yeah, yeah. So I just thought, I was wondering if part of what Burroughs is alluding to in that is just this idea that that you do have to uh, leave momentum there, and you don't want to. I think that writer's block is almost like if you button up and finish an idea fully, I guess is kind of what he's saying.
Yeah.
Like then you've resolved it. You've resolved effectively sort of like that melody so it's hard to get the song going again and to get it in.
Yeah, I think that'd be a version of it for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. I just have to translate everything at
And I
least
think
to
there's
one
almost, I
thing.
mean, there's also the question of at the end of a project, how tightly buttoned do you want it to be? Because then do you leave any room for the listener to get in there and fiddle with it if it's perfect? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Well, and then you get into this whole like sort of tired ass like, how do you know when something's really done, right? And I appreciate people having that question a lot, and I know that it is a question, but it's so much easier, I think, than what people make it. It's like when you just can't either, you can't deal with it anymore. You don't want to deal with it anymore. It's good enough for whatever the demand is for what it actually is going to be. I mean, there's a million different reasons that ways that you know that something's being done, that something you're doing is done or not. You know, but the older and more projects I get, through, it's like I pretty much do something until I hate it, and then I just don't want to deal with it anymore. And it takes a long time for me to come back around to it, to view it in any kind of way that is not immediately putting me back into like you know what, it's fine, it's good. Like I'm just
Right.
gonna, because I mean, especially like with music or even I would say painting or a lot of things, it's like you go down a path. It's kind of like, okay, just because you smoked a joint last night and then went until 3 in the morning editing on something, you're going to wake up in the morning 9 times out of 10 and be like, I've got to clean this up and I've got to undo my steps, or like deconstruct everything that I thought was some sort of
Yeah.
genius anyway.
Back arrow, back arrow, back arrow.
Like, oh, right. And then okay, so let's go to 11 p.m. and see if that's got any.
Right. Yeah. Go back.
Yeah.
Timestamp.
How was I feeling at 11? Yeah. So,
Yeah. It's really good right up to like 11:32.
yeah, but I'm all about too. Like, I mean, it comes from a kind of a cynical place sometimes, I think, but I don't mean it to be. But it's sort of like I say this a lot. And I don't know how to say it in a way that doesn't sound terrible, but it's like no one gives a shit. Also, about whatever you're doing. It's just
I think that's a good place to be, to make art from for sure. I think, my friend Todd Green, this is a Todd Green painting behind me. Actually, Todd's an artist
it's
here in
blurry.
Nashville. It's what
It's
now?
all blurred out.
Oh, you can't really see it.
Yeah,
Well, that's how cameras
yeah.
work. At least how this little camera works. Trust me, it's a masterpiece. But he and I have the discussion a lot about um, like it doesn't have to make sense. And then at some point, we got to the point of taking that so far that one day he's like, no, man, it doesn't even have to be good. And then we started with, it doesn't even have to be good. But I think that, uh, anybody that we know who's like got an active art practice going on, you quickly learn, like when your work is done. You know what I mean? That's it's not a mystery to people who make work a lot. You know what I mean?
I mean, I suppose like there's certain projects that are really open ended that don't serve that notion very well. Of sort of when people have too much time, when people have too much budget, when people have too much leeway,
Right.
or if there's just not even a known sort of destination for the work, it's just kind of being done for the sake of being done. Man, it gets pretty hard. I get there's something about the writer's process that I really envy from, because it's really set up, like you write and you've got an editor and you've got a publication and you've got I don't know. There's like an ecosystem that is functional and has been for a long time for the
Mm-hmm.
collective sort of effort of writing in general. I mean, if you were
Mm-hmm.
left to your own devices, knowing that you didn't have an editor to send it into, or any other
Right.
way to sort of have any governance or perspective on it, then it's like, what do you mean? What is done? I don't even nothing's ever done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's funny. I remember back in the '90s, like there was a studio here in Nashville that I was doing some recording at, and knew the guys there. So I would, they'd be like, "Hey, come on by. We're having a session this afternoon. Say hi to the guys or whatever." So I was like hanging out there a lot and got to know the engineers there and stuff. And I would always like try to pick up on anything, any tips they had, or anything. I mean, I was just trying to learn everything I could at that point. And I remember, one of the early lessons I got was that, essentially, like, whatever budget you have, that's the budget you need. However much time you have, that's how much time you'll need. And because if you got the time, if you have the resources, again, you'll keep going on a project, and then magically it'll be done. Once the money runs out and the time runs out. And if you have 4 days, you'll probably make something great. And if you have 4 months, you may also make something great, but it'll take as long as you got. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, and it's also like if nobody else is forcing a budget or constraints upon you, then it's kind of necessary for you to do it to yourself because
It is, yeah.
it is the way. It's my favorite thing in the world is constraints and limitations. I'm not saying I want everything to be a low budget project. It can be a high budget project, but something with a really impossible turnaround, by most earthlings or whatever the demand is of the person, the
Yeah.
entity sort of wanting the work or whatever. But man, I'm just a huge fan of that, and I'm a huge fan of process in terms of just having cycles or iterations or reps that you're sort of putting yourself through as part of the diet of what you're doing. And that's honestly that's one of my favorite things about doing this is that having great conversations with interesting people, and doing it in a way that kind of keeps you active for having conversations, and especially now, right, where it's like you can
Right.
be pretty monastic now, which is
Yeah.
also an opportunity. But yeah, so and then we split our time usually talking between sort of art and creativity and then fighting, and then we're not the kind of people that do the hot takes and the whatever, but holy shit, we're up against this UFC card that's happening that is the most insane. uh I mean, I'll be totally honest. I mean, like, listening to John Anik talk today about, what he knows about what's happening and, all that. He's very good at being sort of diplomatic and seeing all sides of it. But,
Yeah. I love his
yeah,
commentary.
I mean, he's a master, but you could just see that he's quite rationally not divided, but he's seeing all sides of it very clearly. And this idea, he seemed to have a feeling that there was a kind of an obligation, right? Like these fighters are going to show up to fight anyway, right? So what am I going to do? Like not be there, But at the same time, he's talking about like, I'm not going to be able to hug my kid when I get home, and all that.
Uh-huh.
So for those who are not really in the know on the fighting situation, the UFC is hell bent on having this event, and it looks like it's going to happen. What is it, May 9th or something?
I think May 9th is the day. Yeah.
And it's an insane,
Next Saturday. Not this Saturday, a week from
and it's kind of
Saturday.
like
So,
if it were a concert, it would be if it were a concert for old hippies, right? The lineup is like the Grateful Dead,
yeah.
Jefferson Airplane, Jimi Hendrix, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Santana. Like it's
You're reminding me that it would be hard to find people who are alive. Yeah.
that's dark but real.
You could still do Santana.
Yeah,
I mean, on some level, we could get our friend Shreve
yeah.
in there playing with Carlos again. Um, uh, but I mean, I actually want to spend a second here trying to figure out how to do this. You could do like a Bob Weir, Dead thing.
Right.
You know, um, who else could really actually pull
It's
that
like
off? Jefferson. I mean, a lot of the Jefferson Airplane's going too, but like Grace Slick could somehow put something together, and
so
do a
really
few
what this
things.
is the UFC card is Tony Ferguson and friends.
Tony Ferguson and friends. Yeah, exactly. It's the Monterey Pop of face punching.
Yeah. It's gonna.
Well, I don't know. I think it's I worry because I feel like no. I really honestly feel like no good could come of this. But maybe. I mean, we'll see. Maybe it's all great and everybody has a great time. But now and I'll now clarify though. Is it going to be? It's going to be just a fight with no crowd. Is that right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
Anik
Yeah.
was even saying that because I think he mentioned Rogan, but they're not even going to be at the same table. So
Oh.
that
Okay.
that was what was really interesting to me was just all the different uh, things about this, not just the no crowd. Like people say it, they just kind of go right by it. Oh, okay, they're just going to do it, but with no crowd. Like, oh, okay. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
let's
No.
really think about like what?
It's that whole black box theater thing
Yeah,
again. You know what I
yeah,
mean? It's really I think it's cool. I mean, I almost kind of feel like I want to see all the fights with no crowds. I just want to hear the fighters fighting.
yeah. Well, and they can now they can mic the cage properly and really get everything. And that's what
Oh, yeah.
I saw Anik and Felder having a conversation, and they were just talking about just how in the like thinking about the Ngannou Rosenstrike fight, one of those guys very well is going to hit the canvas, and you're going to be able to hear it in this way. You know,
Boom.
when he was talking
Oh my
about that, my
god.
mind was I was like, oh gosh, like this is, one of the things I thought about was I was like, man, I wanted to tell John Anik, I wanted to say, make sure that somebody from the UFC takes like a really wide shot of the arena and then has like a reasonably good microphone on that's not doing any of the broadcast sound, right? Like, but the actual audio from the camera or near the camera, just to
Uh-huh.
get a sense of like while the fights are going on, like what would it sound like to be in like the nosebleeds
Yeah.
and hear the echoes of the commentary? Because I mean, he's pumped, right? He's going to be yelling and all this, but they're going to be able to hear him. And he's talking about like when they're up against the cage in front of him, he's going to have to sort of try to dial his voice back or something because
Like in an empty basketball arena.
but like people, but just the idea that the corners and that the fighters
Yeah.
themselves are going to be able to hear the commentary in many ways. So all of everything about the entire and also like the way they're doing the locker rooms and just everything. It seems to me to be something where, again, kind of like what we were talking about before with art projects, and what you're doing right now. Don't it's you can't just take a UFC card and say now we're just going to do it pandemic style and we're just going to take these precautions and have no crowd and not expect that there's going to be a whole new thing in a weird way that kind of happens or comes from it as a
Right.
combination of all the different decisions that the participants on every level, whether it's the judges or the commission or the whoever is all there, everybody there is going to be kind of psychically in like a weird, holy shit, like
Yeah.
this is, and then, people have a tendency to go back to like they're kind of like, I'm just going to go through the motions. I'm a professional and like this is what I do. And I think for most things, like if you're a cut man, like that's good. You like don't get all weirded out if you're the cut man, but I was curious
Yeah.
about like from John's perspective, as a the guy calling the fights, like how would you do that in a way that either doesn't feel like you're feigning the enthusiasm. Like of course he's pumped, but that's partly a byproduct of like crowd and symbiosis with other people that you're calling it with. And if you're only hearing them and they're kind
Yeah.
of across the way, there's just probably so many things that are alien. I feel like that.
I think, I think it's going to be interesting because I think those guys, I mean, I think I think if they try to uh, do what they normally do, I don't think that will work. I think they've got to like attenuate it's like MTV Unplugged. You know what
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean? All of a sudden, it's like we have to be, we have to be in this experience and appropriately convey it. You know what I mean? And I think it's going to be fascinating, man. I think it's going to be really fascinating. The whole aesthetic is going to
yeah,
change. So there's parts of me that I'm interested in, and I certainly hope, man, if they can have an amazing card full of great fights, and at the end of it all, everybody goes home, and 14 days later nobody has the COVID virus, well then fucking that's great, and I hope that's what happens. The thing, like I brought up when we were talking with Nancy's class, my biggest thing is how are these guys even training? How are these ladies even training? Because it's not just the event, it's all of the like literally body on body stuff that has to happen to train to fight. You know what I mean? It's not just 3 feet instead of six, it's like no feet. Yeah, you know what I
yeah.
mean?
Negative feet.
I mean, especially like grappling or anything like that, I mean, you're just literally sweating all over each other. You know what I mean? It's like there's no there's complete lack of privacy in grappling. You know what I mean? You have no personal space. That's the point.
Right. That's right.
I'm taking your personal space away from you. You know, it's exactly what is not supposed to be going on right now. You know what I mean? So that part of it to me means, okay, so people are they just not training the way they would normally would? And then that becomes super dangerous. You know what I mean? Because there's a reason they train. They train so that they can protect themselves and they can win. You know what I mean? So I don't know. There's just so much about it that's very worrisome to me. That said, you know, again, Josh was saying the other day, nobody's rooting for this to fail. Nobody's rooting for fights to never come back. You
Yep.
know
We
what I
want people
mean?
to make money. We want
And
people to succeed and be happy and have
sure,
all the things they need. And
yeah, and I'm anxious for the fights as much as anybody is. I know lots of people are. Uh, there's a group on Twitter that's like rewatching old fights on Saturdays and like tweeting about it the way they would be with a live
oh, that's
event.
cool.
So that's
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's also been another aspect of all this that I think has been interesting is I think there is some value of going back and looking at archives of whatever the hell you're into because ultimately way more stuff is made than what needs to be, and so it's nice to be
Right.
able to sort of have a break to kind of go back and explore older books or whatever movies, anything. Who was it I was talking to? They were talking about how they this woman that I work with on some of these art projects, she was talking about how she and her son are like going to quote unquote like clown school, but like sort of intellectual weird clown school and like really going through film history and Buster Keaton and all of
Mm-hmm.
this and her kids probably maybe I don't know 8 or 9 or something and he's totally
Fun.
into it, but like it seems like a thing that a lot of parents probably wouldn't be thinking about in a normal condition. But wow, what a great place to sort of start to really get back down with like Buster Keaton and physical comedy and amazing filmmaking and stunts and just the absolute craziness of what Buster Keaton was doing and with obviously incredible limitations and a lot of
Right.
nerve. So it is
What about Jackie
right,
Chan?
yeah. And so, I think that there is something to be said for just, uh, like, okay, like they want to have this fight. Well, we're gonna have this fight. We're gonna see what happens. But I'll tell you, the card is something else. Nobody's doubting that, and of course, Dana's gonna bring it. It's funny. It reminded me, like, I don't know why I hadn't thought about this in a long time. But it was probably 2011 when the UFC came to Nashville. It was like 2 or 3 times ago they came to Nashville. Honestly, I don't even remember what the card was. I think Pat Barry was fighting on that card, and
Oh wow.
there was I think Khabib was on that card on like the undercard.
What are you talking about? The last time
No,
in
like
Nashville? The last time they were in
no,
Nashville?
it was 2 or 3 times ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I wish I had more information, but I suppose I could look it up. But anyway, but I guess the point is just that I got to meet Dana White at that event, and in my little exchange with him and sort of photo op or whatever that I did, uh, at that time it was all pretty new to me. Like I was only recently transfixed by Daniel Cormier fighting Bigfoot in Strikeforce, and when I saw Cormier just take Bigfoot and throw him around like he was nothing, I
It's
was like,
insane.
okay, there's more going on in this sport than what I'm realizing, and that was my entry. So anyway, it wasn't long after that I went to this UFC card. Of course, here I am getting uh, a couple words with Dana White, and I don't know why I said this, but I just said something to the effect of like, uh, kind of like I'm a total noob or I'm a newbie, like this is awesome, like and and his response to me was he was like, oh no, he said there's no such thing as a newbie. And I was like, huh. And I didn't really understand that. And maybe there's still nothing to understand about it. He's not necessarily like a cryptic or, uh, otherwise hard to read person, I think. Uh, uh, but when I thought about it, I guess what I sort of gleaned from that exchange was just this whole thing is new, man. Like like it's all
Right.
new. Everybody's new. This is all new, and I still feel like it's kind of
Right.
that way. And so now to have that compounded with the current circumstances and what's going on, it's just all new. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. So I think, yeah, and I mean that's one of the things I love about the sport is just that it's it's evolving all the time, and the other sports have a, I don't want to say an excuse, but the other sports have more hurdles to overcome, as most of the other sports that have been canceled,
Yeah.
out of the spotlight are team sports, where, it's like you can't just get away with having a small squad of coaches with you,
Yeah.
and you can, sort of quarantine, these people are in the locker room now, and then the other people can go in later and stuff. You got to have, I mean, a football team, how many dudes are suiting up for a game? You know what I mean? Or a basketball game or a baseball game, so not to mention all the massive entourage of major league sports. You know what I mean? So I think, and I'm just talking about the official people, not the after party
Yeah.
entourage, y'all. I'm not even talking about that yet, but we got to think about that
Yeah.
too. But so I feel like in some ways the UFC can be a little bit lean and mean, and can make moves that other organizations in other sports can't make. And at the same time, I think that the UFC and MMA in general shows a lot of adaptation and dynamism, even week to week sometimes, because of the fact that the sport itself is still defining what it is. You know what I mean? Is still figuring out how it does what it does. What does it look like? How does it get sold? How is it promoted? How do the actual athletics happen? You know what I mean? I mean, every level of it is used to changing. It's one of the things that, we've talked about more than once, and I've talked to other people about a bunch during this whole time, is just the fact that, people I know who are artists and have a creative practice, people I know who generally are self-employed entrepreneur types of any kind, a lot of those people are able to deal with this situation better than folks who are completely removed from those situations, because so much of this kind of like resourcefulness and isolation and all this stuff, it's like, I mean, artists work in isolation all the time anyway. They're not going to an office with 100 people. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's another example that, as we see artists making quick adaptations and finding new ways to do things, I feel like, martial artists, it's not surprising that the martial artists are doing the same, that the fighters are doing the same thing. It's yet again another ratification of the whole idea that we explore here every week on the Art Fight podcast, that there is a connection here. There is obvious things that both communities share, even if they don't always recognize
I love that. Very well said. Very well
it.
said. And by the way,
that could be the end of the podcast,
well,
frankly,
I
because
think
we've been
that's
at
where
this
we
for
are actually, because we're kind of out of time. But
that was like the resolution of the melody right
yeah, it
there.
was. That's true. Well, and by the way, like you've been really great about reminding people to. We've never done all this. I hate this stuff, right? Like, oh, you got to subscribe to the things or whatever. You should give a shit, but hopefully you'll give a shit. And we actually feel like we're onto something and have been for a while. We really love doing it. So if you do follow or subscribe or check things or give us money or write us checks or stand
There's
outside our
no there's
houses
no
and
new
cheer,
there's
whatever it is.
Right. And there's no newbies here, Brian, just like there was no newbies there back in the day. There's no newbies here. And at the same time, if this is the first time or you're just finding out about the Art Fight podcast, we have this is our 88th episode. Is
Yeah.
that right? So there's 88. I mean, it's more than 88 hours because we tend to go on. So it's like it's more than 100 hours of archive that we've already created, and most of it's pretty evergreen content. We'll have guests come on, during a time maybe when they're, have a specific project they want to talk about or something like that. But inevitably, every week going forward and going backward, we always end up just talking about product, process, practice, creativity, growth, all these same things. And so there, it's evergreen. It's an evergreen forest of audio
And depending on
delights.
what friends we have on, sometimes it just becomes like a semi-drunken rant. into
Yeah.
conspiracy theories
There's
or
been
whatever.
some
But
drinking.
it does happen sometimes. But
I'm always high,
yeah,
by the
right.
way.
So there we go. There's the resolve. That was the encore, maybe. So yeah, and thanks
It was like
for
the coda just stopped there.
so everybody can see on the screen that you've got all the links for all of our things, so you can see all that. And other than that, I think we're good. Come back um, Tuesday, 3 p.m., and we'll have something hopefully pretty weird for you. That you're, it's gonna be a little bit different, and uh,
Try to tune into the
it
live, try to tune in. Like if you want to listen to the podcast later, we're 100% into that. And we appreciate everybody who's already been doing that over the last 2 years. And if you get on live with us, we're looking forward to being able to talk to people during the show. So we're really hoping to have more of an interactive vibe happen during these, even when we have the guests. I mean, I could see us taking questions from people who are
yeah,
listening.
it'd be
So
good.
so don't be shy about jumping in the
Yeah, and
conversation.
anything that's left in after, I can kind of go through and call, and if there's anything interesting, we can bring it forward. So don't feel like it's only got to happen during the live show. But anyway, so awesome. Are there any things coming up that you want to mention or plug or any of that?
I mean, let me just think one thing that's I'm looking. This is weird that I'm looking forward to it, and it'll be interesting to see if we see some innovation on Saturday night. I do think the use of video is going to be interesting, but if you're in Nashville and you're somebody who would be going to the art crawl normally, or maybe not, maybe you kind of don't think you're into the art crawl, or you've always think about it but you never go. This Saturday night might be an interesting time to do it. Get on NashvilleScene.com. Check out my column this week. It's called Crawl Space, and it always previews the art crawl. This week, I preview the fact that the art crawl is going to be essentially a link to a YouTube video, and it's going to have video walkthroughs of new exhibits at I mean, I want to say it's like 8 galleries or something like that. A bunch of galleries downtown, not all the downtown galleries, which I hope they rectify. I hope more and more people are included in this. And then a number of the Wedgwood Houston galleries as well. Not quite all of them, but I think that's more about people who weren't ready to participate in one way or another. I don't know that anybody's being purposely left out, by the way. I'm just saying the more the merrier for something
Yeah.
like this. But if you follow any of the galleries, that are downtown or in Wedgwood, Houston, or if you just follow me on Instagram at Mighty Joe Nolan, I'll be sure to retweet this. But it's mostly an Instagram phenomenon. These on Saturday, these galleries are going to post the link. And I don't think it's so much that they're being secretive. I think it just has to do with the fact that probably the video won't actually be edited till like a half an hour before they need it to be. They'll be waiting for it to actually upload to YouTube just in time. That's the way these things usually go. You're putting that last nail into the gallery while the guy's opening the box of wine, so, but if you get on Instagram, follow some of the Nashville galleries, or follow me, or follow Brian. Well, Brian, you can retweet these if you want to, but I'll be definitely sharing this link. You'll go to the YouTube link, and then you'll be able to essentially go on a virtual art crawl. And I'm interested to see how that actually happens. Part of me feels like using video is going to be a much better experience. But it's going to be interesting to see how people use video. You know what I mean, and what they do with it. Because it's my impression that all the galleries are sort of just doing their own thing, and they'll be edited together into one long video. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to pour a drink, and I'm going to go on an art crawl on Saturday night
Nice. I
in
like that.
my TV room. So yeah. So everybody, if you get again, go to NashvilleScene.com. My column just printed today, Thursday, and you can go there, and I have a whole preview of everything everybody will be showing, and I run you through these rules again of how you can find the link on Saturday. So even if you're not in Nashville, if you want to go on an art crawl with us on Saturday night, check out that link. As far as myself, I don't really know that I have anything specific going on today. Actually, I'm feeling maybe I'll run out today. But today is the last day that my billboard will be up in Madison. So that's been a whole month project. I was actually going to run out and see it today, but I didn't. So maybe I'll run out later tonight, or maybe I'll just bid it adieu. I've seen it like 2 or 3 times now, I think. But it's I every now and then I've just had the urge to run down and just look at
Yeah, just visit
it.
it.
Yeah, just check it out. It's right down the road for me, so it's not that far for me to go look at it. But so I don't really have anything that I'm doing to talk about too much. But but check out the art crawl on Saturday night, and then we'll check out some fights next Saturday night.
Awesome. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody. Make sure you go to artfightpodcast.com to get all the latest, and you can get shirts and mugs and all that kind of stuff. And you can
Yeah.
subscribe to all the things and do all the things, and you
Look at
can
my
even
mug. I've
become
got
a
a mug right here,
supporter. You
y'all.
can, yeah, look at that, and you
Right.
can be a supporter for us, 99 cents a month, and so consider that maybe. But anyway, we're just gonna keep doing it no matter what the case is. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks a lot, Joe. And I think that's it, man. We're out. Thanks everybody for being here, and for those that catch it after, thank you for watching the whole damn thing. All right, I'm out. You out, Joe?
Bye.
All right, see you later,
Bye.
buddy.
See you, brother.
See you, everybody.